Hey, everyone, settle in because tonight we're diving deep into the gritty, grim reality of being a prostitute in ancient Rome. Yeah. Forget the romanticized statues and fancy togas. This is the unvarnished, messy truth about what life was really like behind those brothel doors. But before we get into it, do me a favor? Hit that like button if you're ready for some raw history, and subscribe if you want more stories that cut past the cliches. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. There's something wild about knowing this story's traveling all over the globe as we speak. Now, dim the lights, get comfy, maybe have a fan on for that perfect background hum, and let's walk together through the shadows and whispers of ancient Rome's underworld. Ready? Let's see if you could survive this world. Spoiler alert, it's way harder than marching with a legion. Before you can even think about velvet couches, grapes fed by hand, or being swept off your feet by some toga-clad Casanova whispering, Amor, you have to wake up, not in a bed of roses, but on a straw mat that smells like last night's sweat, perfume, and a regretful senator's cologne. You are a sex worker in ancient Rome. Congratulations. Now, before you complain, remember you're not chained to a galley, or picking grain in a field, or bleeding in the Colosseum while an elephant decides whether you look edible. You get a roof. Sort of. And clients. Too many. And a job title that no one says out loud during dinner. Let's set the scene. You're in the Suburra, Rome's favourite cesspool. The slum where gods dare not tread. A rabbit warren of wooden apartments, stacked so high they sway when someone sneezes 2 blocks away. Narrow alleys where smells battle to the death urine. Baked bread, wet wool and ambition. Graffiti everywhere, some political, some poetic, most obscene. One wall reads, "Successus was here with his girl. He did it well." That's the bar and it's low. You live above a lupanara brothel. That's Latin for wolf den. They love metaphors. Wolves. Hunger. Get it? Your madam is named Licinia. She's got arms like boiled ham and a laugh like a collapsing roof. She claims she used to entertain generals, but you suspect she's never left this street. She smells like myrrh and stale triumph. She's also your boss, landlady, debt collector, and the closest thing you have to a mother. You wouldn't cross her unless you wanted your teeth relocated to your throat. You were sold to her, or traded, or rescued, depending on which version she's telling today. You were probably a slave, still are, technically. Rome loves its labels. You're not a citizen. Don't flatter yourself. Citizens debate in the forum. You debate whether the next client will pay in coin or bread crusts. And if you're lucky, not in bruises. Your workroom is a stone cell, barely large enough to stretch your arms, a crude bed, a candle stub, a wall fresco of Priapus with a truly concerning anatomy. It's meant to be erotic. It mostly just makes eye contact at the worst times you wear makeup. Lots. Thick white lead paste on your face because pale is the rage. Never mind the mercury poisoning. Your lips are red from crushed bugs. Your eyes rimmed in soot and charcoal. The effect, somewhere between temptress and demonic owl. But it works. Men like illusion, or at least distraction. You don't wear much else. Maybe a dyed tunic, maybe nothing. Modesty isn't a virtue in your trade. In fact, the fewer layers between you and a coin, the better. The men are, yes. The clients. Rome is full of them. Soldiers on leave, merchants with wandering hands, poets who want to pay in sonnets, and senators with very specific and deeply repressed ideas about punishment. Some are drunk. Some are sad. Some treat you like you're invisible. Others talk to you like you're their dead wife. You learn fast sex isn't the hardest part. It's the pretending. Pretending you're happy. That you're enjoying this. That you remember his name. That the coin he just dropped on the floor is enough. That it's all worth it. You get very good at acting. Rome should really hand out theatre masks with every loincloth. And hygiene. Let's just say this isn't the bathhouse crowd. You keep a sponge on a stick for your own use. He might be using one for something else. You don't ask. Protection? Huh. That's adorable. Sometimes he wears a sheep intestine sheath. Most don't bother. You drink a concoction of pennyroyal and hope. Pregnancy is a professional hazard. So is disease. So is boredom. You laugh when you have to. Cry when no one's looking. Eat when you can. Sleep when it's quiet, which is never. And yet, there are moments. Fleeting ones. A kind client. A funny one. A slow night where you get to sit on the roof and stare at the stars while your legs stop shaking. A coin that buys you something unnecessary. Honey cakes, a ribbon, a moment of beauty in a place that eats beauty for breakfast. Sometimes you dream of freedom, of owning your own taberna, of falling in love with a kind baker who doesn't smell like pickled fish, of never hearing the word faster again. But dreams are dangerous. They make you soft, and in Rome, softness breaks, so you focus on the next hour, the next coin, the next name to forget. Your job isn't love, it's illusion. You're not here to be cherished. You're here to be a mirror, reflecting whatever fantasy walks in the door. And when you're too old, too tired, or too bruised to pretend anymore, well, no one talks about that part. Welcome to the Venus trade. It's your day off. Well, that's what Licinia said last night after you almost collapsed into the oil lamp. You look like someone flogged your soul, she grunted. Take tomorrow off. Let the fresh meat work. You'd like to think that means peace. A chance to bathe without someone pounding on the door. A day to breathe without the taste of another man's breath. A chance to be something other than an open door with a smile. But a day off in the Sobera doesn't mean freedom. It means different chains. First, there's the smell. No client today, sure. But that doesn't cancel the stench wafting through the walls like a ghost with boundary issues. Wet wool, fish, fermented cabbage, and the unmistakable tang of desperation. You'd light incense, but the last time you did that, a neighbor thought the building was on fire and started throwing amphorae out the window. One of them hit a goat. The goat still hasn't forgiven you. So, you sit up. Your muscles protest like unpaid actors. Your back cracks like old pottery. You scratch the flea that's made its permanent residence behind your knee. You'll name him later. Something Roman, maybe Gaius. You shuffle to the wash basin. The water's cold. Of course it is. You splash your face, then gag. You've accidentally used the same rag that was cleaning someone's sandals last week. Or possibly a small corpse. You're not investigating further. Licinia's voice booms from downstairs like Jupiter clearing his throat. Get your shift cleaned! We've got senators sniffing around later! You shout something non-committal and vaguely Roman in return. Yes, Domino! Then slump back into your room. You consider writing graffiti on the wall, something poetic, philosophical. Maybe freedom is a lie sold by men with coins. But your last attempt at philosophy was scratched out and replaced with an exceptionally detailed image of a very specific body part. The artists around here are talented, crude, but talented. So you do what any exhausted prostitute in Rome does on her day off. You go to the market. Now, don't get excited. This isn't a leisurely stroll through stalls with baskets of figs and men playing flutes. This is combat. Elbows are weapons, coin purses are bait. The fishmonger yells like he's auditioning for the Senate. The baker insists his bread is fresh, but it's clearly been reincarnated from a failed wall brick. You buy what you can afford: one loaf, slightly stale, one handful of olives, most intact, and a bruised apple that looks like it's seen war. The apple vendor tries to shortchange you, but you stare him down with the same eyes you use on soldiers. He folds like a toga in the rain. On the way back, you pass a temple to Venus. People are lighting candles, praying for love, for beauty, for passion. You resist the urge to laugh out loud. You've seen what? Love. Looks like under candlelight a man who says your name wrong, trying to convince himself this transaction is fate. You toss a coin into the offering bowl anyway. Not for yourself, but for the girls newer than you. The ones who still flinch when a client raises his hand too fast. The ones who still dream with their eyes open. Back at the Lupanar, Licinia corners you with a list of complaints. You owe for oil, and wine, and the broken chair. Yes, I know it wasn't your client, but the client was on you, and physics says you share the blame. You nod, exhausted by the laws of Rome and gravity alike. You escape to the roof. It's your favourite place, assuming no one else beat you there for privacy, tears, or questionable smoking herbs. Today, it's empty. You sit, you breathe. Below, Rome buzzes like a wasp nest. Children chase dogs. A drunk man argues with a statue. A pair of lovers kiss like they invented it. For a moment, you let yourself feel the sun on your skin. It's warm. Almost kind. You daydream about being a widow. Not because you want a husband, but because widows get to wear veils, cry in public, and avoid conversation. Widows can be dramatic without explanation. It's the closest thing Rome has to privacy. You hear footsteps behind you. It's Livia. She's 14, maybe 15, and too skinny to be doing what she's doing. But Rome doesn't ask for birth certificates. She sits beside you, silent for a while. Then, do you think we'll ever leave? You consider lying, saying yes. That some rich man will fall in love with her and buy her freedom. That she'll own a vineyard and write poetry in the countryside. But lies are expensive, and you've already spent too much today. No, you say, but we might get promoted to better rooms. She nods, like that's enough. Later, you go back inside and find a gift on your mat, a small wooden comb, carved roughly but with care. Someone's idea of kindness. You don't know who left it, but you run it through your hair anyway. It pulls knots and memories. You try not to cry. Night falls. Your day off is over. Tomorrow you go back to the roll, back to the door, the bed, the smile. But for now, you lay down. The mattress is still lumpy. The air still smells like sweat and regret. But the stars are visible through the cracks in the ceiling. You count them until sleep pretends to be kind. Welcome to rest, Roman style. It's not freedom. But it'll do. You've had them all. Tall ones, short ones, sweaty ones who cry before it even starts. You've had men who smelled like wine soaked leather, and others who smelled like they'd been fermenting in a horse trough. You've had clients who paid in silver and clients who paid in pity. The latter are the worst. At least silver can buy you wine. Pity just clings to your skin like the rest of the evening. Rome is full of men, and every single one of them thinks he's special. Let's begin with the senators. Ah yes, the pillars of Roman dignity. The keepers of law, the guardians of rhetoric. The men who publicly decry moral decline, and privately pay triple for things the gods would blush at. You know the type. They arrive in silk cloaks too fine for the Suburra, looking left and right like they're about to commit murder, instead of something far more predictable. They insist on discretion. They want you to call them by a different name, something thrilling like Commander or Augustus. You go along with it? You'd call them Pompey the Flatulent. If it got the job done faster, they talk. Gods, do they talk? About politics, about rival senators, about their wives, who are apparently always frigid. You nod, you smile, you act interested. You pretend you're not mentally rearranging the furniture while they monologue with their tunic around their ankles. When it's over, they sometimes leave a tip. Sometimes. They always say the same thing. You're not like the others. You are. You absolutely are. But they need the fantasy, so you let them have it. Then come the soldiers. Fresh from the front lines, with sunburns and sword scars, and a wildness in their eyes that says they've seen too much and processed none of it. They're loud. Hungry. Desperate. They smell like leather, iron, and homesickness. They're easier in a way. They don't need pretending. They know what this is. A transaction. A moment. A brief illusion of comfort before being thrown back into the meat grinder of duty. They don't want poetry. They want warmth. Food. A body to hold and a voice to tell them they're still human. Some cry afterward. Some fall asleep on your chest like tired children. You don't wake them. The floor's always cold anyway. Then there are the poets, Rome's gift to overthinking. They arrive penniless, with ink-stained fingers and hearts full of metaphors. They want to pay you in verse. Your eyes? They whisper, air like the Tiber at dusk. You're not sure if that's a compliment. The Tiber is mostly sewage. They want to talk before, during, and after. They ask about your dreams, your childhood, your thoughts on fate. It's exhausting. You didn't survive being sold into this life to play philosopher's companion to a man who's allergic to employment. Still, they're not the worst. Just the most exhausting per minute. You also get the ones who are drunk. Properly drunk. Slurring, staggering, smelling like they bathed in wine and regret. They usually can't perform, and when they can, it's a performance no one wants an encore of. They drop their coins, their sandals, their dignity. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they rage. You've had to dodge fists and vomit in the same hour. You learn to read them the moment they walk in. If he stumbles, but makes eye contact, he might tip well. If he stumbles and mutters about his mother, be cautious. If he stumbles and smells like he hasn't eaten in days, get Licinia. If he doesn't stumble at all, just sits down quietly with a faraway look in his eye. That's the one who'll leave you sleepless. Not all clients are awful. That's the dangerous part. Some are kind, gentle. They ask if you're warm enough. They offer to bring you figs next time. They touch you like you're made of porcelain instead of service. For an hour, they pretend to love you. You pretend to believe them. Those are the ones that break you, eventually. Not the cruel ones, the kind ones. You once had a client named Marius, a stonemason. Collused hands, shy smile, paid fairly, never asked for more than you offered, stayed for the conversation more than the act. He brought you bread sometimes. Once, a carved wooden charm shaped like a fish, said it was for luck. He died on a construction site. A column fell. No one told you. You just heard it from a street vendor 3 weeks later. You still have the charm. It's hidden under your mat, next to the comm from your day off. Then there are the sad ones. Not teary, dramatic sad, just hollow. Men whose eyes don't blink enough. Who don't speak unless asked. Who look at you like you're a dream they forgot to wake from. They don't hurt you. They don't touch much at all. They just sit, or hold your hand, or ask if they can stay until morning. They always leave before dawn, quiet as ghosts. And yes, you get women sometimes. Not often, not openly. But they come, rich ones bored and curious, married ones lonely and terrified. Some want to talk, some want to touch. Some just want to know what it feels like to be wanted without condition. You don't charge them more. You don't charge them less. You just try to make them feel safe. Everyone wants something here. Intimacy, power, comfort, escape. A woman who doesn't know their secrets. A woman who won't repeat them. A woman who disappears when the candle goes out. That's you. You are a confessional, a mirror. A moment in someone else's story they pretend never happened. And yet, every one of them leaves a mark. A song, a smell, a phrase your body forgets the motions. But your mind remembers everything. Especially the ones who never came back. There's a pecking order in every Roman brothel. And you're somewhere between warm body and doorstop with feelings. You might think all prostitutes in Rome share the same experience: moan, collect coin, repeat. But no, Rome is obsessed with status. Even in sex work there are layers, and each layer comes with its own rules, rivalries, and rituals of silent war. At the top of the pile, glowing like a temple on payday, is the madam. Yours is named Licinia. She is not soft. She is not warm. She is not motherly, unless your mother once broke a man's nose for underpaying. Licinia runs the lupanar like a miniature empire. She handles the books, the clients, and the occasional punishment. She also smokes a pipe that smells like the underworld and has a laugh that could break terracotta. She used to work the beds, or so she says. You're not sure whether to believe her or not. Her stories change depending on the weather. One day, she claims she once spent a week with a young general who would become emperor. The next, she swears she lived 3 years disguised as a man, fighting in Gaul. Either way, she owns the building now, and her word is law. Madam's a half goddess, half debt collector. You pay her a portion of your earnings. You use her sheets, her rooms, her oil lamps, her everything. Even the pillows belong to her. You could be evicted over a stolen comp, and she'd sleep fine knowing you're curled on the stairs like an unwanted dog. Then below her, we have senior girls. The ones who've lasted more than 5 years without running, breaking, or disappearing. They don't work the busiest nights anymore. They get the wealthier clients. They're allowed to say no. Not often, but enough to taste the illusion of power. One of them, Cassia, has been here longer than the walls. She's got crow's feet, silver streaks in her hair, and the kind of sigh that carries years. She doesn't bother with makeup anymore. Clients still line up. There's something about her eyes, calm, unreadable, like a priestess who's seen the gods drunk and unimpressive. Cassia doesn't speak unless it matters. She once told you, if you can make a man forget who he is for 10 minutes, you've done your job. Then she winked and walked off with a senator who had a scroll stuck in his belt and breath like vinegar. She's respected, feared, even. When she enters a room, younger girls move out of her way like pigeons scattering before a chariot. Licinia listens to her, barely, but it's still more than anyone else gets. Then, in the swampy middle, there's you and the other working girls. You're not new. but you're not old enough to be allowed opinions. You're experienced, sure, but that doesn't mean you get privileges. You get the middle-tier clients, merchants with coin, retired soldiers, tired shopkeepers looking for a soft voice, and someone to pretend they're still impressive. You get one oil lamp, one chamber pot, a curtain for privacy if you're lucky. Your shift is long. You start at dusk and end when your legs give out or the wine runs dry, whichever happens first. And every time a new girl arrives, you're reminded you are replaceable. Which brings us to the new meat. They arrive scared. Eyes too wide, skin too clean, hair too well brushed. They still flinch when someone raises their voice. Still believe they can bargain. Still think this is temporary. You never tell them otherwise. That's not your job. One of the new ones, Narilla, arrived just last week. 16 maybe. Pretty. Soft-spoken. Too soft. She cried the first night. Loud, hiccuping sobs like a kicked dog. Licinia let it go, for 1 hour. Then she stormed in, yanked the girl up by the arm, and growled. You want to cry? Do it into a pillow and not where the men can hear. Narilla hasn't cried since. At least, not out loud. The new girls often form cliques, whispering in corners, sharing scraps of food, bits of advice. It's like watching baby birds in a nest lined with broken glass. You try not to get attached. You've seen too many of them vanish, sold off, beaten, or just gone one morning with nothing left but a sandal under the bed. Then there are the favourites, dangerous creatures. Sometimes a girl becomes the favourite of a regular client. He requests her, brings her gifts, gets possessive, says things like, you don't need to see anyone else, and I could take care of you. It sounds sweet, it's not. Favourites end up dead, or stolen, or sold to a villa where they're kept like pets. Sometimes they vanish with promises and return 3 months later with scars and silence. The lucky ones come back to Licinia. The unlucky ones never come back at all. And finally, lurking just below everyone else, there's the ghost tier. These are the broken ones. Girls who can't work anymore, too ill, too injured, too gone in the eyes. They stay in the back rooms, sweeping, cooking, staring at the wall. Some go mad. Some drink until they can't stand. Licinia keeps them around, partly out of loyalty, partly to scare the rest of you straight. You saw one once, curled in a corner muttering about bees in her blood. She used to be the prettiest girl here. Now she won't look you in the eye. You avoid that room. Because every girl knows, if you're not careful, that's your future. Hierarchy in the brothel isn't about titles. It's about distance from collapse. The closer you are to the door, the fresher you are. The closer you are to the kitchen, the closer you are to the end. So you keep your head down. You work. You nod to Cassia. You avoid gossip with Narilla. You don't complain about your shift, your shoes, or your newest bruise. Complaining is for girls who believe someone cares. And above all, you never forget this place doesn't love you. It doesn't hate you either. It simply uses you. And when you break, it replaces you. Before the client walks through the door, before the first coin drops into your hand, before the moan, the lie, or the familiar ache in your back, you prepare. This job isn't about beauty. That's a luxury. Beauty is for patrician wives, bronze statues, and Venus on a good day. No, this job is about illusion, control, selling a version of yourself that feels both irresistible and impossible to truly possess. And that starts with your tools. First, makeup. Every Roman prostitute wears it. It's a rule, unwritten, but enforced with more fire than the 12 tables ever saw. The paler your skin, the better. Pale means indoor life, leisure, elite. You, of course, are about as elite as a worn-out sandal. But that doesn't matter. Your job is to look like what they want, not what you are. So you paint your face with white lead. Yes, lead. It cakes into your pores. It dries your skin. It poisons you slowly. But it makes you ghostly and smooth. And for some reason, Roman men think that's worth dying for. So you dab, you smooth, you pretend it doesn't sting. Then your cheeks red. Always red. Not the colour of real flush. Too soft. You need bold brazen. The kind of red that makes a man think, she's already excited. It's crushed cinnabar or red ochre. Sometimes, if money's tight, you mix animal fat with rust. You don't ask where the rust came from. You just blend and smile. Your lips are next. They get the same colour, if not darker. A rich, deep hue made from pulverised beetles, sometimes berries. You apply it carefully. Evenly, Smudged lips suggest carelessness. And no matter how exhausted you are, the face must look fresh, youthful, inviting. Your eyes get the most work. You line them with charcoal or soot. Some girls use antimony powder, but that one burns. Beauty through agony. You darken your brows, extend the lashes. The goal is drama, mystery, a gaze that says I know something you don't. You've spent years perfecting the come closer. Look, ironically, you developed it while trying to get men to stay away. Hair, that depends on what you have and what you can fake. Blonde is in style this year, thanks to some gaulish mistress scandal up in the Palatine. If your hair isn't blonde, you can bleach it with pigeon droppings or wear a wig. Licinia keeps a chest of them, styled and cleaned once a month whether they need it or not. You've worn them all. Long curls, tight coils, sleek buns. Sometimes you forget what your real hair looks like under all that paste. Then comes the perfume. Not just to smell good, although that helps when your last client reeked of goat and garlic, but to set the tone. Rome loves scent. Exotic, musky, overwhelming. The kind that clings to sheets for days. You dab it behind your ears, between your breasts and on your inner wrists. The effect is intoxicating. Not just to them, to you. For a moment, it feels like you belong to a different class. Someone expensive. Someone untouchable. Then the scent fades, and you remember you're neither. There are more tools. The subtle ones. The ones no one teaches you, but you learn fast or you fail. Posture, for example. You keep your shoulders back, chest forward. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's an invitation. Your chin tilts just enough to say, you may approach. But your eyes? They never promise, only suggest. Your voice becomes an instrument. You pitch it higher, lower, depending on the man. Rough for soldiers, sweet for poets, coy for senators. You mimic desire with tone alone. After a while, you can fake passion so well, you forget what the real thing ever sounded like. Then there's the laugh. Not the genuine one. You haven't used that in years. This is the practice chuckle. Light, flirtatious, just loud enough to be heard through a curtain. It says, I'm enjoying this, even when your stomach is tight with dread. You learn to release it on command like a trained bird call. Your clothes? Minimal. Sometimes none at all. When you do wear something, it's dyed gauze, see-through linen, a single piece of draped silk if you're lucky. Modesty doesn't live here. It was evicted years ago to make room for business. Jewelry, only if you're trying to impress. Gold hoop earrings, a cheap bangle. Anything shiny enough to catch candlelight and suggest wealth, even if it's borrowed, even if it pinches. If it distracts the client from your eyes or the bags under them, it's doing its job. But all of this, paint, perfume, posture, it's nothing without the true tool of the tradie pretending. You pretend you're happy to see him. You pretend his jokes are new. You pretend the coin he offers is more than enough. You pretend this isn't the 10th man today. You pretend you want it. And sometimes, in a dangerous twist of survival instinct, you pretend so well that you almost believe yourself. Those are the worst nights. When you smile and it doesn't feel fake. When the body says, yes, before the mind catches up. Because that's when the line starts to blur. And that's when you know you're losing control. Pretending is exhausting. But it keeps you safe. It keeps them satisfied. And it keeps Licinia off your back. Some girls say they don't pretend. That they don't need to. That their charm is real and their enjoyment sincere. Those girls either last a year, or they're lying better than the rest of us. Because in this job, sincerity is dangerous. It leads to attachment. Attachment leads to pain. Pain leads to weakness. And weakness in this line of work gets you chewed up, spat out, or sold to a man with a villa and no concept of no. So you get up. You check the mirror. What passes for one polished bronze, warped like memory. You touch up your face. Retighten your shift. Breathe in the perfume. Flash the practice smile. You're not a person now. You're a performance. A goddess wrapped in paint and patience. And the curtain's about to rise. By now, you've learned to read a man before he even speaks. Before he grunts or gropes or gestures toward the curtain, you've already sized him up. His toga, his sandals, how many rings on his fingers, whether he reeks of cheap wine or imported olive oil. It's a survival instinct, like a dog sniffing another to avoid a bite. You learned it after one too many accidental bruises and unintended chokes. There's a difference between a man who wants to use you and one who wants to hurt you. And in this job, those aren't always the same thing. Let's talk about expectations. You'd think the men of Rome came to you for pleasure, right? A simple transaction. Coin for comfort, lust for leisure. But no, most of them aren't looking for pleasure. They're looking for proof. Proof they're men. Proof they matter. Proof they can conquer something, anything, even if it's just your body. Especially if it's just your body. They arrive swaggering, talking about themselves as if Jupiter personally blessed their loins. And you, well, you're supposed to nod, moan, pretend you've never felt such divine thunder before. Even if his thunder couldn't scare a house cat. That's your role. You are the audience to their performance of masculinity. You applaud with sighs and gasps, timed just right. A bad review could mean a broken rib. Sex in Rome isn't soft moaning under moonlight. It's a performance with stakes. Not for pleasure, but for power. And you're the stage. Some men want to pretend you're their wife, mostly because they can't speak to their real one without being reminded they're balding and impotent. Some want you to be a goddess, or a slave, or both. Others want to lecture you about military campaigns while thrusting like a badly trained centaur. You smile. You arch. You breathe heavy, because gods forbid he realizes you're not into it. Because then it's not a transaction, it's a betrayal. You fake it. Every time. The noises, the twitch, the clench, like a flute player miming notes in a silent performance. And the irony, the more convincing you are, the more coins he might toss your way. If you fake it well enough, he leaves feeling like a god. You, meanwhile, rinse off in a cracked ceramic bowl, hoping the water is cleaner than what's been inside you. Let's talk about smell. Perfume is essential, but not for seduction. It's self-defense. You dab it beneath your nose like armor. Not every man stinks, but when they do, they really commit to it. Fish sauce breath, armpits like fermented goat, and a crotch that smells like the Tiber after a plague. So you hide in clouds of imported myrrh and lavender. You layer your scent like lies, like masks. Some girls smear honey on their lips, hoping to distract. Some bite their cheeks before a session so they look flushed, eager. One girl, Livia, painted her nipples with crushed roses and swore it doubled her earnings. Maybe it did. Men are gullible, especially when aroused. But all this effort, it's not to arouse you. It's not even to arouse him. It's to maintain the illusion. An illusion that you're here because you want to be. That you're lucky to be touched by him. That you enjoy this. That your moans are sincere. That your wrists don't ache from being yanked too hard. That none of this is performance. None of this is survival. In private, we joke about it. Quietly. Between sessions, when we're soaking our feet or scrubbing each other's backs with rough cloths. Did you get the senator with the lazy eye again? One might whisper. He asked me to call him Mars and slapped my thigh so hard I farted. Laughter is soft, careful, not because we're shy, but because if a client hears us laughing about them, well, we've seen girls punished for less. We tell stories, not about the sex, but about the absurdity, the man who cried afterward, the one who prayed before, the soldier who couldn't finish unless you sang a nursery rhyme, the patrician who only climaxed while describing his mother's kitchen. You'd be shocked how often Roman men want to be held, not just handled, as if your arms are softer than their wife's silence. Speaking of wives, Rome is full of them. Pale, perfumed, perfect. They glide through the streets like marble statues with beating hearts. They pretend not to see you, but they do. They always do. Sometimes they come to you, not as clients, but as spies. They want to know if their husband visits, what he says, what he likes. Some even offer you coin to whisper lies in his ear. You're the best I've ever had. Your wife doesn't deserve you. You should leave her. It's not just about sex. It never was. It's about politics. About leverage. About secrets whispered in the dark, then sold in daylight. And yet, with all this performance, all this theatre, there are moments, fleeting, rare, where something close to real slips through. A man weeping after, a soldier trembling before, a boy barely past manhood asking, quietly, does it always hurt like this? You could be cruel, you could laugh. Instead, you take his hand, guide him gently. Because sometimes, in the middle of this circus, humanity peeks through the curtain. Then it's gone. You tie your tunic, you rinse the blood from your thighs, You smile at the next man walking in like he owns the world. You lie again, because lying pays better than truth. Lying keeps you safe. Tonight, you'll sleep beside the same girls in the same sweat-soaked sheets. You'll stare at the ceiling and wonder what your life could have been if you'd been born a senator's daughter or a merchant's wife. Then you'll remind yourself, those women are just as trapped. Their cage just has more cushions. So no sex in ancient Rome isn't scandalous or sultry or sweet. It's survival wrapped in satin. And you're the mask, the stage, the show, and the Romans. They always want an encore. If you ever want to see Roman hypocrisy in full ceremonial garb, take a stroll through the forum during festival season. There's wine, poetry, gods on every corner, and speeches about Roman virtue that would make a marble statue blush. But right around the corner, down a narrow alley that smells like warm olives and desperation, is where people like me made their real coin. Not with virtue, with vice. Welcome to the unofficial marketplace of flesh. No togas required. Let's get one thing straight, sex in ancient Rome wasn't hidden in back rooms with nervous curtains and hush money. It was loud, it was commercial, and it was carved into the damn walls. I mean that literally, men drew us in murals mid-act, in every position geometry allows, and then paid extra to reenact it. If you're shy, you're in the wrong century. But not all customers strolled into the brothel with coins and confidence. Some treated it like confession. They'd shuffle in, whisper apologies to Jupiter, and then stare at your ankles like they were possessed. You'd think we were sirens pulling men into sin with our gazes, but most of the time we were too tired to make eye contact. We just wanted the transaction to end with minimal fluids. A typical day began with oil. Not the perfumed kind for noblewomen, but olive oil scraped off someone's leftover fish stew. You used it to slick your hair, shine your arms, make yourself look less like someone who'd slept on a straw mat next to a man named Goatbeard. Presentation mattered. Rome was obsessed with appearances, glistening shoulders, flushed cheeks, a practiced smile that said, "I'm enjoying this," even if your soul had long since packed up and moved to Gaul. Then came the choosing. Customers didn't just walk in and pick the first warm body. Oh no. Some of them fancied themselves connoisseurs. They'd ask about your background like they were shopping for wine. Where are you from? Greek. Iberian. Oh, you've got that Eastern look. Exotic. Translation. Do you look expensive, or will I have change left for lunch? If you were lucky, you worked in a lupanar, a purpose-built brothel with stone beds and wall art so detailed it practically gave instructions. Each room had a little price list painted above the door, which might as well have read, basic thrusting, 2 asses, emotional trauma included. The more luxurious spots, closer to the forum, offered curtains, cushions, and the illusion of choice. Out in the Subura, the slums, sex was something you did standing up behind a cart. And then there were the patrons. Oh, the men of Rome. From senators with garlic breath and philosophical guilt, to gladiators who smelled like blood and wanted to reenact their latest match on your pelvis. Some came for dominance, others for comfort. You learned to read them quickly. The ones who called you goddess were usually the cruelest. The ones who couldn't meet your eye might leave a tip. Sex itself, not as glamorous as the mosaics would have you believe. Fast, functional, often fumbling. Rome wasn't big on foreplay. If a man lasted longer than the time it takes to boil an egg, he probably considered himself a romantic. Positions weren't about pleasure, they were about control. Romans liked to be on top, not just literally. If you wanted anything resembling your own pleasure, you had to manufacture it, along with the moans. Theatrics, darling. You weren't just a body, you were a performer. But no one clapped. In between clients, we'd huddle in corners, wiping ourselves clean with rags that should have been burned 2 owners ago. We shared gossip like it was currency. Who'd been rough? Who'd been sweet? Who cried afterward? So that last one happened more often than you'd think. Sometimes we'd sing, not for entertainment, but to remind ourselves we still had voices. There were tricks of the trade, of course. Slutch a little to look humble. Laugh at their jokes, even if they made less sense than a drunk centurion's map. Never look too clever. The moment they thought you were smarter than them, they'd either leave or try to punish you for it. Intelligence was threatening. Breasts were not. Some of us had regulars. Men who came back again and again, not for the sex but for the illusion that someone gave a damn about their stories. They'd bring figs, wine, even poems. One man brought me a carved hairpin shaped like a dolphin. He didn't even touch me that night. Just talked about his wife who'd died giving birth. I cried harder than he did. Others treated you like meat and made no secret of it. One soldier, fresh from the provinces, threw a coin at me like I was a street performer and asked if I could do that thing with my foot. I did it. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to eat. Dignity's hard to chew on. And through it all, we learned to compartmentalize. Your body wasn't yours, but your mind. That you could protect. We'd count ceiling tiles, recite epic poetry in our heads, picture distant hills we'd never see. Anything to be somewhere else while they finished. But it wasn't all darkness. Sometimes, after a long night, we'd sit together and laugh. Real laughter. Not the forced kind for clients. We'd tell stories about the weirdest requests, like the senator who wanted to be spanked with scrolls of Cicero, or the baker who cried after climax because his wife said he kneaded dough too aggressively. We were survivors, not just workers. And there were moments, fleeting, precious, when a touch felt kind, when a word was gentle, when someone looked at you like you were more than a whole or a commodity. Those were rare, but we clung to them like relics. So yes, Roman sex was messy, commercial, and often dehumanizing. But the women in it, we were not broken. Tired, yes. Scarred, certainly, but not broken. We adapted. We endured. We found ways to live inside the spaces between transactions. And we built bonds with each other stronger than the stone walls around us. Because when the lights go out in the lupanar and the city grows quiet, it isn't the moans that echo loudest. It's the quiet resilience of the women who survive it all. By the 8th week, or was it month, time blurred like wine in water. I stopped marking days, mostly because the charcoal I'd been using was confiscated when my master thought I was drawing escape maps. I wasn't. I was just trying to remember when I still had a name that wasn't whispered behind coin. But forget that. Today was for games. Not the good kind. Not the kind with dice, drinks, and a maybe friendly Roman who'd pretend to listen to your story. No, these were the games of performance, of social strategy, of surviving the shifting moods of powerful men. I knew the moment I woke up and smelled olive oil, sweat, and the stale perfume of someone trying to mask poor hygiene with imported rose water that today wasn't going to be normal. Flavia, a Greek girl with eyes that used to sparkle, and now just watched, muttered, "They're bringing in senators again." She didn't say it with excitement. She said it like someone predicting a thunderstorm right after you finished hanging the laundry. Senators were a mixed bag. Some of them came with coin and silence. They liked things quiet, perhaps too quiet. Others came with declarations, roleplay, demands for you to pretend to be their slave, or worse, their wife. The cruelest ones wanted both at once. We prepared like gladiators, which is to say, without a say in the matter. My tunic was traded out for a thinner, near, transparent one, dyed a colour someone in the atrium whispered was fashionable in Ephesus. I didn't care. It itched and made me look like a melted pomegranate. Still, I posed in it as instructed. Legs tucked just right, shoulder exposed, the kind of display you might see in a sculptor's workshop, except no chessel, only eyes. A man named Lucullus arrived first. His toga was too white, which meant he either had new money or something to hide. He stank of myrrh and hubris, the worst combination. He didn't even look at me when I poured him watered wine. That wasn't a snub. That was the game. You pretend they don't exist, and they try to make you prove you do. Flavia once told me, "Don't give them everything at once. Men are like hunting dogs. You throw them the meat too quickly, and they get bored. Let them sniff around a bit." So I walked slower, poured slower, let the wine drip a little on the table. An accident, but not really. Lucullus noticed. "Slumsy," he said, not even glancing at me. "Forgive me," I said, with just the right tilt of my voice. Half apology, half invitation. He finally looked. Game on. That day blurred into wine and riddles. He asked me if I believed in love. I asked him if he believed in honesty. We danced like philosophers with bad intentions. He wanted me clever but not too clever. He wanted edge but no bite. It's exhausting, pretending to be exactly as broken as a man wants to feel noble fixing. Later, he asked me to sing. I used to sing for fun. Now it felt like dragging a whetstone across my own voice. Still, I sang a song from my mother's village, soft and low, even if the words were just sound to him. When Lucullus left, he tossed a silver denarius at my feet. Not the tray, not my hand, the floor. Because that's the real game, isn't it? He could have laid it in my palm, could have thanked me. But this was power. He gave me silver like you might feed a dog, generous, but detached. I didn't pick it up right away. That's another rule. If you scramble for the coin, they think they own you. If you ignore it, they wonder if they paid enough. It's a dance. Everything is a dance. Even the way we bleed is choreographed. After he left, I went to the back room, sat beside a chipped amphora, and finally let my body go limp. That's the only time you're yourself, between clients, in the quiet places. You slouch. You sigh. You remember what your laugh used to sound like. Some of the girls joked, called it the Temple of Sighs, a sacred spot to let out everything we couldn't in front of men like Lucullus. There's power in silence, in not performing. It's fleeting, like candlelight in a windstorm, but it matters. One of the new girls cried. She was still learning. Not just the moves, but the mask. You don't cry when they're watching. You don't tremble. You don't reveal the you that still dreams about fig trees and running barefoot across fields. That girl is a luxury you can't afford. But alone in that back room, we were sisters. We shared oil for bruises. We fixed each other's hair. We made fun of the ones who grunted like goats and complimented the ones who didn't make us work too hard for the coin. I once asked Flavia what she would do if she were free. She laughed, bitter like spoiled wine. Freedom is a trick, she said. Even free women play games. They just wear better jewelry. I didn't agree. But I didn't argue. Some nights, the games followed you into sleep. You'd dream of conversations that never happened. Clients who were kind. Hands that touched you like you mattered. You'd wake up and feel the ache of that lie more than any real bruise. Still, we played. Because that's what life was here. A series of performances stitched together by short naps and long silences. It wasn't all horror. Sometimes, a client would be gentle. Would ask your name and actually listen. You'd want to believe he was different. But Flavia warned me. The ones who ask your name are the ones most likely to forget it. And yet, we kept the game alive. Because hope, like performance, is hard to kill. Even here. In the flicker of lamplight, I adjusted my tunic, sat back down near the front, and waited for the next senator, soldier, or merchant to arrive. I straightened my back, smoothed my hair, the curtain rustled, and just like that, the next round began. Rome was a lot of things: marble temples, screaming crowds, sweaty togas, but above all, it was a game of power. And when you were a prostitute in ancient Rome, power was the one thing you didn't technically own, but you learned how to borrow it. Like wearing someone else's jewelry to make the right impression. You could smile at a senator, lean just the right way, and suddenly he'd forget you didn't have a name. At least not one he'd bother remembering. See, technically you were property. Not in the poetic, you belong to the night sense, no. You literally belonged to someone. A pimp, a madam, sometimes even the state. If you were a slave, forget negotiating prices. You'd take coins if they gave you any at all. If you were lucky enough to buy your freedom or start as a free woman, you could register officially as a meretrix, which sounded fancier than it was. It mostly meant Rome got to tax your back pain. But the real currency wasn't coins. It was control, information, proximity. You were around men when they were weakest, sweaty, drunk, half-clothed and louder than they should be. They let things slip. Who was bribing who hated who wanted to be emperor. And if you were smart, you didn't just moan and nod, you listened. You memorized names. You filed them away like receipts for future survival. There were rules in the brothel, but don't get sentimental. They weren't there to protect you. They were there to protect the money. No bruises above the neck. No dead clients. Don't poison anyone important. Hygiene was optional, unless the client smelled worse than the drains. Then maybe you got to light some incense, assuming the last girl didn't set it on fire already. Your body wasn't just your tool. It was your uniform, your storefront, your resume. If you were young and soft-skinned, you got better rooms. If you were older, maybe you knew tricks. If you were especially beautiful, you might even get your own house. lavishly decorated, with curtains you weren't allowed to touch and perfumes you weren't allowed to waste. All for appearances. Because the Roman elite wanted filth behind closed doors, but the illusion of class up front. Don't be fooled by the statues and poems. Romans were not subtle. They carved penises into walls. They painted orgies in dining rooms. They read dirty poetry out loud at dinner parties like it was weather talk. Sex wasn't whispered about. It was advertised. Literally. Brothel walls had price lists. Some were etched in Latin. Some were just drawings, in case reading got in the way of arousal. But if you really wanted to survive, you needed a patron. Not just a regular. A powerful man. One who'd slip you extra coins, maybe a bracelet, maybe even a promise to take care of you. You knew better than to believe it, but it still felt like armor. A name you could say if a drunk soldier got handsy. A name that made other men hesitate, just long enough for you to walk away instead of crawl. And oh, the soldiers. The Legion boys came in waves, tanned, half-crazed, and convinced every coin in their purse was the last one they'd ever spend. They drank too much, laughed too loud, and cried when they thought no one was listening. You learned to read them fast. Which ones needed softness, which ones wanted cruelty, which ones had buried a friend that morning, which ones just wanted to feel like someone gave a damn. You were their fantasy, their priestess, their punchline. Sometimes all three. Some women fell in love, foolishly, terribly, with poets or guards or merchants who promised they'd come back. Some did. Most didn't. And you learned not to ask where they went, because the answer was usually somewhere better. And still, there were nights when you felt powerful. Draped in borrowed silks, your hair perfumed. Men watching you from across the tavern like you were something sacred instead of rented. For a moment, you believed it. You played the role so well, you fooled yourself. You walked like a queen even though your feet ached and your stomach was empty. Then the sun came up. Daylight didn't lie. It exposed the cracks, the bruises you'd painted over, the silence that echoed too loudly in the morning, the scent of wine, sweat, and regret. You washed it all away with cold water and cheap soap, then did it again the next night. Because the rent didn't care. The madam didn't care. Rome didn't care. Sometimes, women like you rose higher. 1 in 100 became a lover to a senator, even an emperor. They called those ones delicatae, rare, refined, expensive like rare perfume. But even they were still property, just with fancier furniture. You were always just one scandal away from being thrown out, replaced, forgotten. You heard of women who tried to leave, fell in love with a baker or a sailor, changed their names, moved to the countryside. It sounded romantic, didn't it? But Rome had a long memory, and neighbours who gossiped, and men who never forgot the faces of the women who made them feel powerful in the dark. You couldn't outrun a city like this. It stuck to you like oil. So you stayed, you worked, you memorized faces. You learned how to say no without saying it. You learned how to endure boredom, pain, and drunk men with swords. You learned that sex wasn't the act. It was the performance, the negotiation, the ritual. And you were good at it. Not because you wanted to be, but because you had to be. You weren't a goddess. You weren't a sinner. You were a survivor. A flicker of laughter in a city that forgot your name as soon as it used your body. And you made that flicker last as long as you could. Because in Rome, survival was the real profession. Sex was just the side hustle. You always knew a good night was coming by the smell in the air. Not the perfume or incense you learned to carry like armor, but something heavier and more primal. Roasted meat glazed with honey and herbs. When that scent drifted from the domus atop the Palatine Hill, it meant a senator or an equestrian had decided to throw a banquet. Politics, philosophy, and debauchery, 3 pillars of Roman nightlife. The first 2 usually ended with fiery speeches and slurred insults. The last meant you. Sometimes you were invited by name, sometimes simply ordered, other times fetched by a trembling slave who avoided your eyes but whispered. The master requests a woman who doesn't cry too easily. You never quite knew if that was a compliment or a warning. You put on your best, meaning the least worn. Silk, carefully painted your lips with crushed beetroot for a deep red and rubbed a drop of stolen. Expensive oil behind your ears, the scent just strong enough to mask the sweat and sorrow beneath. Tonight, you were a carefully crafted ornament. a plaything to be admired and used. The villa itself was a monument to excess. Marble pillars soared higher than your entire body stretched out. Floors polished so clean you could see your reflection, though you never dared to look too long. Rich Romans preferred reclining on plush couches, their arms draped across cushions, sipping wine from golden goblets and snatching grapes from silver dishes served by boys too young to understand the twisted world around them. You entered silently, eyes cast low, stepping through the heavy curtains into this world of wealth and whispered cruelty. You were not the star here, not even close. You were decoration, entertainment, the garnish on the lavish feast of power. Tonight's host was Gaius Julius Vaccia, a man with 3 names and no conscience. His toga was impossibly white, probably costing more than your whole life. He smiled wide enough to show all his teeth, but you had heard the stories, how he once had a slave whipped for sneezing during a speech. You planned to keep quiet and still. There were others like you here, women of the same trade. You recognized them not by name, but by eyes too tired, too wary, too resigned. One wore golden bangles clinking softly up her forearm, betraying nerves she tried to hide. Another had hennaed her nipples a deep red, a trick learned from dancers in far-off Egypt. The men noticed. The wives never did, or if they did, they pretended not to. This was an all-male event, no wives to whisper accusations or demand virtue. Just powerful men and their pleasures. The kind of symposium where Plato would have recoiled, unless his idea of philosophy included wine, fueled lust and spanked bodies in the shadows. Your job was assigned without question. Lucius grabbed your wrist as you passed the wine jug, a rough, calloused hand that made your skin crawl. His breath smelled of garlic and cheap wine, and he whispered, "You smell like crushed figs." You didn't, but it was the nicest thing anyone had said in weeks. So you smiled and let it linger between you, softening the night's edge. Lucius was barely a man. Cheeks still unsure if they wanted to grow a beard, and eyes that flickered between bravado and fear. He drank like the wine was his last treasure and laughed too loudly, like silence was a punishment worse than the lash. His tunic was stained and tight at the arms, probably stolen or borrowed. As the toasts began, lavish speeches to Mars Bacchus, and various triumphs none of them earned. Lucius squeezed your thigh, testing you like bread to see if you'd rise to the occasion. By the 3rd cup, the room dissolved into chaos. Grapes flew through the air like missiles. A slave was slapped for a joke gone wrong. And 2 men challenged each other to wrestling matches on the mosaic floor, grunting like wild beasts while their bodyguards looked on with bored expressions. You waited. That was the job. Wait, smile, and let your body become furniture until the moment came to earn your keep. Finally, Lucius stumbled from his seat, beckoning you with a crooked finger. You followed him through long, echoing corridors, past marble busts of ancestors whose noses were broken by time and their egos intact as ever, into a small room with cushions stained from countless nights of sin, a door that never quite shut, and a bed rough with years of restless bodies. He fell onto the bed, clumsily trying to pull you down, missing by inches, then laughed like it was a joke only he understood. You didn't laugh, not during this part. Your job wasn't to enjoy, but to endure. He fumbled with his tunic. Then yours, but you were faster. Practice taught you how to move, how to get in and out without scars, visible enough to be noticed but painful enough to remember. You were a sword swallower of flesh, a dancer who never missed a step, a mask of tragedy and comedy and neutrality, depending on the audience. Lucius wanted noise, moaning, loud enough to fill the halls with the illusion of ecstasy. You gave him what he wanted, each breath, each sigh perfectly timed. You threw your head back just enough, arched your back in all the right places. Not because you felt anything, but because he needed to believe you did. When it was over, he rolled off you with a heavy sigh, already half asleep before his hand even touched the pillow. You lay still for a moment, counting the cracks in the ceiling. 10, 11, 12. You slipped out quietly, cleaned yourself with a rough cloth from the corner, and adjusted your tunic. No coin lay on the table beside the bed. Typical. You'd have to chase the steward in the morning for your pay. Again. As you walked through the villa's dark corridors, you passed men vomiting into urns, others weeping silently into their wine cups. You made no sound, offered no judgment, just a shadow in red silk gliding through marble holes. The decadence was suffocating, the laughter brittle and hollow, and you, the ghost who everyone pretended wasn't there. Outside, the night was warm and the stars cold and indifferent. The same stars that watched over senators and slaves, soldiers and whores alike. Equal in their distance, untouched by human suffering or joy. You took a deep breath, the cool air filling your lungs like a temporary bomb. Tomorrow would bring another banquet, another drunken boy with hands that were too rough and a coin purse that was too light. But for this night, you walked home in silence, sandals tapping softly on cobblestones, your heart still intact. Not full, not empty, just intact. And in ancient Rome, that was a victory worth holding on to. In Rome, silence was a currency as valuable, and often more dangerous, than silver coins. If you worked in the shadows, selling what others bought with a wink, and a purse full of coin, you learned early that what you didn't say could save your life. And what you did say, that could bury you faster than a legionary spear, by the time you reached your 3rd year. Or was it your 5th? You learned to speak without words, to listen for whispers hidden beneath drunken laughter, and to wear silence like armor. You could read a man's mood from a glance, the nervous flicker of his eyes when he wanted to confess sins too dark for the forums, the subtle twitch of his lips when he was hiding debts or betrayals, the quick shudder of his breath when he contemplated something violent or terrible. One evening, a senator came into the brothel, older than most statues in the forum, his face carved by time like a map of every mistake he had ever made. His hands trembled slightly as he poured wine into his goblet, and his eyes darted around as if shadows were chasing him. He didn't want what you offered, not exactly. He wanted an ear. You sat beside him, lips sealed, letting his voice fill the cramped room while his hand brushed yours lightly, almost like a warning. He spoke of enemies in the Senate, of whispered plots and rivalries hidden beneath the marble columns. He spoke of a power shifting beneath Rome's feet, dangerous, unpredictable, and deadly. His words spilled out in urgent fragments, soaked with fear. You said nothing. You nodded once or twice, a soft mask that told him you were both interested and invisible. You understood that your silence was your shield and your weapon. What you carried inside your mind was safer than any dagger hidden beneath your tunic. That night, you learned the true cost of your profession. It wasn't just the bruises from rough hands, or the stolen moments of sleep on cold floors, or even the bitter sting of watered down wine. It was the burden of secrets, the weight of knowing things no one else dared to remember or speak aloud. You were a living vault in a city where trust was a luxury few could afford. The senator returned days later, eyes haunted but grateful. He slipped a heavy coin purse into your palm and whispered a single word, "Remember." That word hung in the air like smoke, binding you to a pact forged in shadows. But silence wasn't just about politics or secrets. It was survival in the brutal, daily grind. If you whispered the wrong thing, laughed at the wrong joke, or glanced too long at the wrong face, you risked far more than a scolding. You risked exile, punishment, even death. The madam who ran your brothel was ruthless, sharper than any dagger and twice as unforgiving. She understood the power you held, but she kept it tightly chained, never letting it slip beyond her control. Her smile was sharp, her patience thinner than the silk you wore on your worst days. She demanded obedience, not only in business but in the secrets you kept and the loyalties you hid. One evening, a new girl arrived, barely 16, with eyes so wide and hopeful they reminded you painfully of your younger self. She still believed in kindness and freedom, those fragile, foolish dreams that Rome ground into dust. You took her under your wing, teaching her the unspoken rules of this dark world. Keep your mouth shut, your eyes low, and your heart locked tight. You told her, voice soft but firm, "This city will try to break you. Don't let it." She cried that first night. You held her close, whispering stories of those who had survived, who had thrived despite the cruelty. You told her about the moments of grace, the stolen smiles between sisters who understood pain without words. You reminded her that power wasn't always visible. Sometimes it was in endurance, in smiling when the world tried to crush you, in walking away intact when everything inside screamed to break. The days blurred into months, and months into years. You became a master of reading men like open books, each gesture, each breath revealing more than any words could. You learned who paid extra for kindness, who demanded cruelty for sport, who sought escape in fleeting touch. Your body was no longer just flesh and bone. It had become a ledger of debts paid and favors owed, a map of connections stretching through Rome's darkest alleys and highest towers. You were both servant and sovereign in this kingdom of shadows. Yet even in this life, moments of unexpected grace appeared. A client who treated you like a person, not a possession. A whispered conversation in the quiet hours before dawn. A laugh shared with a sister who knew your pain without needing to ask. One such night, a poet came to the brothel. Not like the others, soft, spoken, eyes full of distant dreams, hands trembling with something fragile and precious. He asked your name, and when you answered, he listened. He recited verses that made the stone walls feel less cold, less permanent. You felt something stir inside you, a flicker of hope, a whisper of something you thought was lost forever. But Rome was quick to remind you of your place. The poet left with a promise to return, and you waited, knowing some promises were as fleeting as morning mist. Still, you held his words close. They became your armor on nights when darkness seemed endless. A reminder that even in the harshest places, beauty could survive. Then came the night when chaos erupted. A brawl in the streets spilled into the brothel, soldiers dragging men away, whispers of rebellion and treachery tightening like a noose around Rome's neck. The city's heartbeat quickened with fear. You knew your silence would be tested. Secrets would be bartered like weapons. Trust was a luxury no one could afford, and so you learned to speak without speaking, to watch without seeing, to live in the spaces between moments where power whispered its cruelest truths. Because in Rome, survival was the greatest victory, and silence, your most precious weapon in Rome, your body told stories no words ever could. Every scar, every bruise, every faded mark was a chapter written in pain and survival. As a prostitute, you learned quickly that your flesh was both your burden and your shield. It bore witness to nights you wanted to forget and mornings you barely survived. The first time a client left a bruise across your shoulder, you felt a strange mixture of shame and pride. Shame because it marked you as someone who had been touched roughly, pride because it proved you had survived. You traced the faded purple lines in the mirror, telling yourself the pain was a reminder. You were still here, still breathing. Not all marks came from violence. Some were accidental, a too tight strap, a torn sandal, a careless tug on your hair. But even these small injuries spoke volumes. They told stories of long days on your feet, of restless nights on hard floors, of countless bodies pressed close in cramped rooms. The madam was merciless about these marks. No visible bruises. She barked one morning, inspecting your arms like a general reviewing troops. If a client sees one, you lose 10 coins off your pay. She was right. Men paid for illusion, not reality. They wanted to believe they were the only ones who left their marks, not the other way around. So you learned to hide. You wrapped your arms in thin silk scarves, layered oils to dull the redness, and moved carefully, as if every motion was a performance on a stage where you were both actor and audience. But hiding didn't make the pain disappear. It just made you carry it in silence. Sometimes the marks were deeper, emotional wounds that no bomb could heal. You'd think they'd dull with time, but they didn't. They grew sharper, lodged in your mind like splinters. Every time a client ignored your name and called you girl or slave, the wound reopened. Every time a man laughed too loud or whispered too close, you felt it twist again. There were nights when the loneliness was unbearable. When you sat alone in your small room, counting the bruises on your skin and the memories in your heart. You'd trace the lines with your fingers, wondering how many more you could carry before breaking. But breaking was not an option. Rome demanded strength. It required you to rise each morning, dress your wounds, and present yourself like a goddess, even when you felt like dust. Your fellow sisters in the trade shared the same stories, marked by their own battles. Some wore their scars proudly, like badges of honor. Others hid theirs behind layers of makeup and smiles. But all of you carried the weight of the city's demands, etched into your bodies and souls. One woman, Julia, had a face so scared she refused to show it to clients. She said the marks were her story, not theirs. But at night, she would tell you about the man who had thrown a goblet in a jealous rage, the soldier who had dragged her by the hair, and and the madam who punished her for bleeding too long. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were fierce. "I survive because I have no other choice," she said once, her fingers tracing a particularly deep line on her cheek. "These marks, they're my proof." You nodded, knowing her words were true. Your marks told your history. They were the map of pain and endurance, a silent testament to a life lived on the edge of suffering and survival. Sometimes, clients were gentle. Rare, but they existed. Their touch was soft, their words kind, and for a moment, you forgot the scars. You felt human again, not just property. But those moments were fleeting, like a flame in the wind. They didn't erase the marks, they only made them sharper when the kindness faded. You learned to carry your marks with grace, to make them part of your story without letting them define you. You were more than your bruises, more than your scars. You were a survivor, a woman who navigated a world that wanted to break her and turn that pain into strength. One day, a sculptor came to the brothel. He was fascinated by the marks on your skin, the way light caught the curves and shadows of your bruises and scars. He said they told stories that marble never could. He wanted to capture your pain and beauty in stone. You hesitated. Letting someone see your marks was like revealing your soul. But something in his eyes was different. Not pity, not judgment, but respect, you agreed. For days you sat for him, still and silent, as he shaped clay into the image of you. Not the woman the city wanted, but the woman you were. The scars were there, not hidden, not erased. They were part of the art. When he unveiled the statue, you saw yourself reflected in the cold stone, not perfect, not beautiful in the way the poets wrote, but real. And in that moment, you felt a flicker of pride. Your marks were no longer just wounds. They were proof of survival, proof of a story worth telling. And in Rome, that was the most powerful thing of all. In the city of Rome, faces were everything, and at the same time, they were nothing. You quickly learned that the masks men wore were heavier and more complicated than any toga, more elaborate than the richest jewels. The senator who summoned you to his villa wasn't just a man, he was a fortress of secrets, pride, and fears so deep they never dared to surface in daylight. Behind every smile hid a calculation, and behind every glance lurked a hidden agenda. And you became an expert at reading those faces, not just their eyes, but the flicker of a twitching lip, the tightening of a jaw, the subtle way a brow lowered when they thought no one was watching. Every face was a landscape of desires and dangers. To survive, you had to learn that landscape intimately. At first, you thought all men were the same, greedy, cruel, eager to consume and discard. But as the years passed, your eyes opened to a more complicated truth. They were not so different from you, trapped behind masks of power and control because the city demanded it. They were prisoners of their own ambitions and fears, shackled by expectation and pretense. Just like you. There was Marcus, a wealthy merchant whose smile could light up a room, but whose eyes betrayed the weight of a lifetime of regret. He came often, not for pleasure, but for company. His hands trembled when he reached for you, and his voice softened when he spoke your name, like a prayer whispered into the dark. You never asked what haunted him so deeply. Some wounds were too raw for words. Then there was Gnaeus, a soldier whose face was a map of battles and scars. His manner was rough, his voice barked like a drill sergeant's orders. He drank too much and joked too harshly. But late at night, when the wine ran dry and the torches flickered low, he confided in you with surprising tenderness. He told stories of the front lines, friends lost to blades and betrayal, nights when death seemed the only certainty. His face, once hard and unyielding, softened in your presence. You wondered if beneath his armor of violence, he longed to drop his mask and be something more. And Lucilla, the wife of a senator, who came secretly in the dead of night, pale and drawn, her eyes flickering with both fear and desire. She whispered to you about loneliness and gilded cages, about a life trapped beneath silk and expectation. You understood her pain, different in shape, but no less sharp than your own. Behind her jewels and powdered face was a woman imprisoned by silence, desperate for escape. Over time, you came to see the brothel not just as a place of flesh and coin, but as a crossroads of stories, a nexus where broken dreams and fleeting hopes intertwined. Each face was a chapter in Rome's endless saga, each visitor a thread woven into a tapestry of lust, power, and survival. Your own face became your greatest mask. You learned to smile when you felt rage, to laugh when you wanted to cry, to look indifferent when your heart screamed for mercy. It was a performance perfected over years of practice, worn like armor. Sometimes, when you caught your reflection in a polished bronze mirror, you barely recognized the woman staring back, her eyes wary but unbroken, her lips curved in a smile both genuine and false. The clients never saw the woman behind the mask. They wanted only the illusion, pleasure without questions, escape without judgment. You gave them that illusion, but in your quiet moments, you longed to show them the truth. To drop the mask and let your real face be seen, raw and unguarded. One evening, a young man arrived at the brothel. He was unlike the others, nervous and unsure, his eyes wide with a kind of innocence you thought had long since vanished from the city. When he looked at you, it was not with hunger or possession, but with curiosity and respect. When he asked your name and listened carefully to your answer, you felt a flicker of something long buried. Hope. He spoke of dreams beyond Rome's suffocating walls, of a life unbound by chains of expectation and secrecy. For a moment, you believed in his vision. You imagined a future where faces were honest, where masks were unnecessary, where you could walk the streets as a woman, not a shadow. But Rome was quick to remind you of reality. The young man left the next day, swallowed by the restless crowd, lost to the endless tide of the city's indifferent masses. You returned to your place behind the mask, hiding the woman beneath layers of silk and silence. You understood that in this city, faces were shields, and masks were necessary for survival. Yet, even beneath the heaviest mask, the heart remained, and sometimes, just sometimes, it found a way to be seen. You thought often about the faces you encountered, each one a story of desire and fear. The senator's facade cracked in private moments, revealing a man desperate to keep his secret safe. The soldier's stern visage melted into vulnerability when the night was quiet. The noblewoman's polished exterior masked a suffocating loneliness that echoed your own. You came to realize that everyone in Rome wore a mask, some gilded and ornate, others cracked and worn. Some hid pain so deep it would drown them if ever revealed, others disguised ambitions so fierce they consumed their humanity. In your reflections, you understood that your mask was no different from theirs. It was a necessity born of circumstance, a tool for survival. It shielded you from harm, but it also isolated you. There were days when you caught glimpses of the woman beneath, when a client's kindness caught you off guard, when a sister's laughter warmed your heart, when the poet's verses touched something soft inside. But those moments were fragile and fleeting, like glass in a storm. You learned that masks were not just for hiding, sometimes they were for protecting, for shielding what was most precious and vulnerable from a world too cruel to understand. So you wore your mask with quiet dignity, mastering the art of concealment. You became both actress and audience, weaving performances that entertained and protected. You smiled and laughed, even when your soul ached. And behind that mask, you carried the truth of who you were, a woman forged in fire and shadow, resilient and unyielding. One night, when the lamps were low and the city's noise had faded to a murmur, you stood before a cracked mirror and let your eyes meet your own. For a brief moment, the mask slipped, and you saw the woman beneath, scarred but unbroken, wary but hopeful. And in that reflection, you found strength. Because in Rome, where faces were masks and masks were survival, the woman behind the mask was the true victory. Rome never truly slept. Not the way you imagined when you were young, before the walls closed in and the nights stretched endlessly. The city breathed in the dark. Whispers slithered through alleys, lanterns flickered behind heavy curtains, and footsteps echoed on cobblestones, slick with the grime of centuries. You learned quickly the shadows were alive, and they carried secrets darker than the deepest well. Your world was built in those shadows. The brothel, tucked away between crumbling temples and the bustling forum, was both a refuge and a prison. By day, it hid behind quiet doors and stone arches. By night, it became a stage for power, pleasure, and survival. You knew every crack in the walls, every creak of the floorboards, every secret passage hidden beneath the dust. The city was a labyrinth, and you were its ghost. The shadows hid many things: lovers stolen in the dark, plots whispered in hushed tones, and lives broken like fragile glass. You watched it all, eyes wide and heart steady, knowing that to survive you had to be both invisible and everywhere at once. Sometimes the shadows brought danger. The city streets weren't safe after dusk. Not for a woman, not for anyone. You learned to move like a whisper, to keep your footsteps light, your breath steady. You avoided the drunkards who stumbled through the night, the soldiers on patrol with sharpened spears and sharpened tempers, and the thieves who prowled for easy prey. Every shadow held a threat, but also a chance to disappear, to escape, or to strike back. One night, as you made your way home beneath the moon's pale light, you heard voices in the narrow alley behind the tavern, low and angry, words thrown like stones. You paused, heart pounding, eyes adjusting to the gloom. Two men argued, their faces half hidden by hoods. You couldn't catch the words, but the threat was clear. You slipped into a side passage, blending with the darkness, waiting until they passed. When you finally emerged, the city felt colder, emptier. But the encounter lingered in your mind like a warning. Rome's shadows were growing darker, more dangerous. The brothel itself was not immune. Rumors of rebellion simmered in whispered conversations. Soldiers disappeared overnight. Men who once walked with swagger now glanced nervously over their shoulders. Even the madam, fierce and unyielding, seemed on edge, her sharp eyes darting to every corner as if expecting betrayal. You heard stories of uprisings in the provinces, of slaves who had taken up arms and fought back. The city's heart beat faster, caught between fear and the promise of change. And you waited, silent and watchful, knowing that the coming storm would touch everyone. In the meantime, you clung to the routines that kept you sane, the careful rituals of dress and makeup, the whispered greetings exchanged with sisters in the trade, the stolen moments of laughter that cut through the darkness. These small acts of normalcy were your anchors in a world that threatened to unravel. Your nights were spent in the company of men who sought escape from their own shadows. Some came for pleasure, others for power, some for forgetfulness. You learned to read their moods like a map, guiding them through the maze of desire and distraction. You became both healer and captor, offering solace while guarding your own heart. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, you would stand on the rooftop of the brothel and look out over the city. The marble temples gleamed in the moonlight. The Tiber River shimmered like a ribbon of silver, and the distant hills held secrets older than time. You wondered what the future held for Rome and for you. Would the city's shadows swallow you whole? Or could you find a way to step into the light, to claim a life beyond the brothel's walls? The thought both terrified and thrilled you. One evening, a man arrived at the brothel who was unlike the others. He was quiet, his eyes calm and steady, his presence somehow soothing amidst the chaos. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. You found yourself drawn to him, curious and cautious. He told you stories of distant lands, places where people lived free, where masks were unnecessary, and where shadows held no power. His voice painted pictures of skies vast and open, of fields that stretched beyond the horizon, of lives lived in sunlight rather than darkness. For the first time in years, you allowed yourself to dream, to imagine a life beyond survival, beyond masks and shadows, to believe that somewhere, something better waited. But Rome was never kind to dreams. The city's shadows were patient and relentless. They whispered of danger and betrayal, of broken promises and shattered hopes. And you knew that to chase the light, you would have to face those shadows head-on. So you prepared. You gathered your strength, your wits, and your courage. You tightened your grip on the small freedoms you had carved out, and you vowed to protect the fragile spark of hope kindling inside you. Because in a city built on power and secrecy, the greatest rebellion was to survive, and to believe in a future where the shadows no longer ruled. Freedom in Rome was a tale told in whispers and shadows, a fragile hope that danced just out of reach for most, and for you, it was no different. Over the years, you had come to understand that freedom wasn't some grand gift handed down by the gods or the ruling class. It was a prize wrested from the claws of a city that thrived on control, masks, and the silent suffering of those it exploited. The man, the one with calm eyes and stories of distant lands, had lit a flicker deep inside you. His words of open skies, endless fields, and lives unshackled by chains haunted your nights and coloured your days. He painted worlds where women could walk unafraid, speak without fear, and live with their names sung openly, not whispered furtively in dark rooms. The image was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. For years, your identity had been a cage. Rome did not see you as a woman with dreams or fears. To them, you were a commodity, a shadow flitting behind closed doors, a mask worn by necessity. To be free meant shedding not only the chains that bound your wrists or the walls that trapped you, but the very identity Rome forced upon you. You were no longer just the girl sold for coin, but someone with a past, a future, someone who deserved breath beyond survival. But freedom was never free. It demanded sacrifice, courage, and risk, more than many were willing to pay. To take freedom meant turning your back on everything you knew, risking everything you had. It meant stepping into the unknown, where danger lurked in every shadow and trust was a precious, rare jewel. The madame of the brothel watched you closely. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. She saw the spark in your gaze, the way you lingered on thoughts that weren't about the next client or the next coin. Her smile was thin, her warnings subtle but unmistakable. She reminded you, always, that your place was here under her roof, within the city's grasp. Rome's laws and power favored those who obeyed their station, and punishment for those who dared to dream too loudly was swift and brutal. You nodded each time, keeping your true thoughts locked away like precious gold, hidden deep where no one could steal them. But inside, the fire blazed brighter. You began to weave plans in the shadows, carefully and quietly. You gathered scraps of information from drunken clients, watched the city's pulse for cracks and openings. Every whispered secret was a stepping stone on your path. One night, as the moon carved silver paths through the city, your resolve hardened. It was time. You would leave. Not just the brothel, but the suffocating walls of Rome itself. You would escape the tangled web of control, oppression, and silence. You would chase the promise of a land where your body was your own, where your voice could rise without fear, where your name was not a secret but a song. The days that followed were a blur of careful preparation. You whispered your intentions only to those you trusted, allies chosen not by friendship but by necessity. You exchanged stolen coins for passage, memorized secret routes through the city's maze, and steeled your nerves for what lay ahead. Every step was a risk. One slip, one betrayal, and your dream would shatter like thin glass. The madame's eyes darkened with suspicion. Her grip tightened as she watched you grow distant, less compliant. She warned her own with veiled threats and sharp words, orders to keep their eyes on you, to report any hint of rebellion. But you were silent, moving like a shadow among shadows, hiding your true self beneath layers of practiced calm. The night of your escape arrived. The city pulsed with festival lights and raucous laughter, the air thick with wine and secrets. You slipped through the throngs like a ghost, your heart pounding louder than the drums that echoed through the streets. Every glance felt like a dagger, every whispered suspicion a noose tightening around your neck. But you did not falter. At the city gates, where soldiers stood like stone sentinels, you told your rehearsed story. A late errand, a visit to kin, nothing more. Your voice was steady, your eyes calm. They let you pass, unaware that beneath your calm lay a storm of determination and hope. Beyond the gates, the air shifted, cooler, clearer, touched by stars untainted by city smoke. You breathed deeply, savoring the taste of freedom. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, riddled with dangers you could not yet foresee. But with each step away from Rome's shadows, you shed pieces of your old life. The chains, the bruises, the masks. You carried with you the stories of those you left behind. The senator with haunted eyes, the soldier softened by pain, the noblewoman trapped in silence. Their struggles were stitched into your soul, a tapestry of survival and resilience. As dawn painted the horizon with pale gold, you paused to glance back at the city, a sprawling maze of stone, power, and pain. No regrets stirred in your heart. You did not forget the lessons Rome had carved into you. But you were no longer its prisoner. Freedom demanded everything, and you had paid the price. Every scar, every whispered secret, every moment of stolen courage was part of the cost. But in return, you gained something precious, the chance to be more than a shadow, more than a mask. You stepped forward into the unknown, into hope, into light, into a future shaped by your own hands. The road was long, and the night was still full of shadows. But for the first time in years, you walked it free.